morning, happy Monday. You're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danny Laurel.
And I'm Jess De Los Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day, Monday. The Bangko Sentral says the domestic economy is now on its way to a full recovery from the pandemic-induced downturn. But analysts warn that global risk could spill over to the country.
Now, even the banking sector is bullish on recovery. The country's largest bank expects to post strong performance this year. That's despite uncertainties arising from the war in the Ukraine and the upcoming elections.
The Villar Group looks to raise more funds this year through the listing of its coffee, power, and REIT segments on the local bourse.
And local shares are seen to move sideways this week on increased spending ahead of the May 9 presidential polls. We begin our broadcast with the Bangko Sentral expressing confidence that the Philippine economy is now on its way to a full recovery.
Despite this optimism, analysts warn of headwinds from the war in Ukraine and the potential slowdown in the United States. Jokno told CNN International in Washington that the country is looking to hit a growth of 7 to 9% this year after emerging from the pandemic-induced recession with a 5.7% GDP expansion in 2021. Recall that at the height of the COVID-19 health crisis in 2020, the Philippines fell into recession with a 9.6% contraction. Jokno also said that the impact of the war in Ukraine is indirect through higher pump prices and eventually faster inflation. However, economists continue to flag external risks such as the Russia-Ukraine war, as well as the possible slowdown in the U.S. economy. Former BSP Governor Diwa Ginigundo said the monetary tightening in the U.S. could upset financial markets and affect emerging economies, including the Philippines.
And speaking of recovery, local banks are optimistic about the outlook for better performance this year. That's despite the uncertainty arising from the Russia-Ukraine war and the upcoming polls. Now, BDO President Nestor Tan said the bank expects profits to grow by up to 10% this year after the good start they saw in the first 3 months. Tan said recent economic reforms, such as the passage of the laws amending the Retail Trade Liberalization Act, the Foreign Investments Act, and the Public Services Act, could open up growth opportunities for the local banks. Now, for his part, East West President Antonio Moncupa says loan losses are likely to continue declining, but he also says the bank's earnings are still unlikely to return to pre-pandemic levels this year.
Now, still on banks, the Bangko Sentral sees loan demands for companies and households to grow this second quarter. That's on the back of continuing economic recovery. The central bank said there is a net rise in the overall demand for credit from all firm types based on the Senior Bank Loan Officer Survey, or SLOS, for the first quarter. The BSP notes that the results of the survey also showed a net increase in overall demand for all categories of household loans, including housing, credit card, auto, and personal or salary loans. The BSP said the survey indicated expectations of a net increase in overall demand for credit from firms, largely attributed to improvement in customers' economic outlook. All right, Dan, so much news here on the banking space. Are our lenders feeling the love from investors this morning?
I wanted to say yes, but I will have to say that there is a broad-based sell-off going on, and our banks are some of the hardest hit. Financials down by 1.5%, and we had that on the headlines, but we do have a couple of banks still in the green here, and I want to kick off with our biggest lender. That is, of course, BDO. That is the hardest hit today, down by 0.2%. Even despite the fact that CEO Nestor Tan did mention loan portfolio increasing by 8 to 12% in 2022, 5 to 10% net income growth as well, but he did reiterate that the economic outlook is still mixed. 2022, a lot of uncertainties. And while we're still on that space, take a look at PNB. That's up by 0.3%. They are about to get a 3.68 billion peso cash infusion. They have just sold a foreclosed property to port operator ICTSI. That's a 32 square meter property right by the Manila port. So just exactly there, close to the Manila ports of Razon. Now, this according to PNB President Vic Veloz. also, the sale monetizes another low revenue generating foreclosed property, giving it, of course, a cash infusion. Now, just let's check in on the market open. As I mentioned, broad-based sell-off pulling down the market, still well below the 7,000 levels we closed in last week here. Let's take a look at the biggest movers of the day. I'm just going to pull out the one-day chart for you so you can see that Emperador, the only one really in the green this morning, that's been seeing a lot of swings and losses on that possible listing. Will they list? Will they not list on the Singapore Exchange? Up by 3.3%. But the rest of the equity space, at least in the index, in the regis. And finally, just one quick note on Dito Telecom. This is the board has penalized them for scrapping their rights offer. They will be imposing sanctions, although we are not very clear as to what sanctions or these penalties are. Recall that in January, they deferred their stock rights offering due to less than ideal market conditions at the time. Now here to discuss more on the markets, we have with us live in studio Matt Cabangan, President of AAA Equities. Come and step right in, Matt. Very happy to welcome you back here in studio.
I'm happy to be back here, Danny. It's nice to be back to normal.
I know, exactly. So hopefully we'll be seeing that as well spill over into the local boards. Now tell us, let's kick off with how the index is doing this week. You know, a lot of things going on, especially 2 weeks ahead of the elections. How are you seeing this perform? Are we going to be back at that 7,000 levels, especially with all the volatility going on?
Well, Danny, like you mentioned earlier, there's just so many headwinds going into the rest of the year. Naturally, locally, we have the election, and I think a lot of business people in particular are putting off a lot of big ticket items until that's out of the way.
Okay.
But we look abroad. Just last Friday, we saw U.S. stock market sell off by 2%. Right? Those types of moves don't happen on a normal business day. So obviously, we have the Ukraine war, we have rising commodity prices. You know, we have central banks raising rates, and a bit of cloudiness with regards to how fast the BSP will start doing that, because they are behind the Fed in that regard. So we do have so many risks coming up that it's hard for anyone to really buy into this market with real conviction and in real size.
Okay, but now that you mentioned that, you know, the U.S. markets had slid, is this us pricing that in this Monday morning? And also the fact that the Fed might be raising by 50 bips on May, is that a function of that and less about, you know, how fundamentally we're recovering as an economy?
Yeah, I certainly think that we're selling off today, particularly just this is a reaction to global markets.
Okay.
If you look at the earnings we've seen, right, like BPI, for example, posted very strong numbers. I think BDO released theirs today. Now, clearly, with BDO down 2%, the market's not very happy about it.
Yeah.
But all things considered, the earnings are quite strong, especially when you compare them to the stuff that you've been seeing out of the US, where everyone has missed estimates.
Okay.
So I think locally, our story is still very sound. It's just that there's just no investor appetite right now to pick things up at these valuations.
Okay, well, let's talk about those earnings first quarter. So far, we've got those two big guns in the banking space. Tell us, disappointed? Does that show anything about how the rest of the year is going to be going? Or does that show you some optimism that when the economy reopens, we're quick to rebound?
Well, I'm very happy to see the bank earnings show stronger interest income, right? That's
Okay.
really where you want to see the bulk of your bank's earnings. So it's not a lot of one-offs. It's really the core business is doing much better. So in that regard, I'm very happy to see it. But moving forward, really, investors want to know what's coming next, and it's not very clear what's gonna be happening, especially with regards to BSP.
Okay, now let's talk about the earnings here and the multiples. So we're trading at 15.7 times forward earnings, far from the ways that we were seeing even earlier in last year or December 2021. How low could this possibly go, especially as we anticipate more earnings coming in?
That's a tough question to answer. I think, investors are just scared right now. And personally, I don't think we've seen a capitulation event yet. So
Okay.
I'm in a very bearish camp. I still do
Right.
think this index goes maybe 6,500 in the next 2 months.
Okay.
So how low it can go, I don't know, but that's certainly where I feel like things are going.
Okay, got it. Let's talk about some fundraising happening still, and some people still, bullish on the equity space. Let's talk about the Villar IPO. 3 IPOs in 2022. So Vista REIT, of course, they did mention they're moving from low-cost housing towards townships, so luxury market even. You've got Siquijor Island Power Corporation in the third quarter and a coffee IPO. Too much too soon, or justified by the revenue streams that we've seen, and I don't know, all home, all day that they did last year?
Yeah, Mr. Villar really has been Mr. IPO the last couple years. Now, while it's great that we're seeing more listings, I mean, I always welcome new listings. I think market participants are a little scared right now. I mean, given that recent IPOs have not done so well,
Okay.
but also because in particular, Mr. Villar's IPOs have not done well in particular. So, I don't see the average retail investor looking at this with a great deal of excitement. But personally, I do welcome all these new listings.
What about the REIT space and how those REITs have been doing? Have they been delivering as was expected, particularly since there's still closures when you look at office spaces and tenancies, POGOs leaving? Why the optimism still on REITs and commercial spaces?
Well, REITs historically, at least in their short history here in the PSE, have had a phenomenal run. But I don't think that investors now are looking at REITs because we're now seeing a rising interest rate environment, right? So
Okay.
REITs are especially sensitive to interest rates because they're essentially listed bonds, right? They're just cash flows of rental income. So once you have rates, if we do see rates rise aggressively, we're going to see REIT prices fall. And by and large, we've seen that happen already to the big ticket REITs like Ayala REIT, Robinson's REIT. So the timing of the listing, I think, could be better, but I'll take what we can get.
Okay, and if when they do list, how would that affect the rest of the REIT market? Will we be seeing, an outflow from specific REITs into Vistaland REIT or from the Vistaland stock itself towards VLL REIT?
Well, I don't necessarily think we'll see outflows from other issues. I think Mr. Villar has indicated that the yield on his REIT will be somewhere in the neighborhood of 6%. So that's just a bit lower than Robinson's REIT. I don't think we'll be seeing sell-offs in other issues, but I do think that there is still plenty of appetite for these high-yielding REITs.
Okay, now Matt, if REITs are not the story now because of the high interest rates, which sectors are you looking out for here that might be defensive in the event of higher inflation environment, higher interest rate environment?
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. The flavor of the month really is commodities.
Okay.
And when we're talking PSE, we're talking mining companies. Now today, they're doing very poorly, clearly.
Yeah.
But I think these are really good buying opportunities to be scooping up the nickel miners, the coal miners, because this is really going to be the story, I think, for the next several months to come.
Okay, but how much more to run? Because that's been the story, and people are afraid, okay, is this too high already? Is this overvalued? How do we know?
Well, in my opinion, we haven't even really seen a real crunch yet in these markets. Now, naturally, we've seen the futures markets sort of go a bit crazy a few months ago at the outbreak of the Russian war. But this Russian war has lasted way longer, I think, than most people expected. So I do think that these supply issues have not yet been solved, and we're only going to be seeing them getting worse as time goes on. Although it is a bit quieter because it's not quite a big ticket headline like a war is.
Okay, so you can see the nickel miners here. I mean, Nickel Asia up by 46% already year to date. Matt, final question before we let you go. How has the retail trading appetite been, especially at AAA equities? Are people still, stuck at home, enjoying trading, interested in cryptocurrencies and these sort of commodities, or have they shifted over into blue chips, into longer term ticket items?
Well, I think the retail appetite right now, especially, well, it's really a lot like the institutional appetite, which is it's not very strong, right?
Okay.
Perhaps people are too busy
Compared to last year, you mean, or compared to?
Well, compared to
previous?
last year, definitely.
Okay.
I think people are a bit busy this year, maybe watching Johnny Depp's
Trial.
his trial. But you know, I think what we need to see for retail to come back are just more listings.
Okay.
We need to see if the foreigners come back as well, because the retail guys, let's face it, are not enough to push this market higher on their own. We will need institutional players to come back in a big way.
And we need the issues offshore as well to deliver that for us to bring them back here. All right, thank you so much for those insights, Matt Cabangon, AAA Equities.
Apple users, are you excited for the new iPhone 14? On Bloomberg's Power On, Mark Gurman gives us a preview of what we can expect with the next generation of the iPhone, from new colors to screen sizes and even new emergency features. Let's watch this.
It feels hard to believe that the iPhone 14 launch is only about 6 months away. That means it's time to start discussing what we can expect from the next generation versions. As we all know, the iPhone 13 was a fairly muted update, focusing on camera enhancements, a minor speed increase, and a higher frame rate ProMotion display on the Pro versions. This year's new iPhone upgrade, however, will be a bit more significant. In terms of design, it will follow Apple's recent pattern and reuse the same general look for the third year in a row, but of course add some key enhancements. You can expect a larger camera bump, updated colors, and on the Pro models, a pill-shaped cutout for Face ID and a hole punch-sized cutout for the camera to replace the notch. The larger notch cutout, however, will still exist on the regular versions. The other key change this year will be screen sizes. Apple will now offer both the Pro and regular models, each in the same 6.1-inch and 6.7-inch screen sizes for the first time. It will also stop making the 5.4-inch iPhone mini size. You should also expect the iPhone 14 Pro to get a new A16 chip, while the cheaper models will likely keep the A15 processor around for another year. The iPhone 14 Pro versions will also get a new 48-megapixel camera for its wide-angle lens to take far better pictures, but the regular 14s will likely stick to 12-megapixel sensors. Lastly, another feature Apple has been working on is the ability for the new iPhones to send emergency texts and report SOS situations over satellites. That would help Apple compete with Garmin and give it yet another cool, potentially life-saving feature. I'm Mark Gurman. This is Power On.
Coming right up after the break. We're 2 weeks away from the May 9 polls, and presidential candidates are wasting no time to woo voters.
More of that and other stories when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.
Welcome back. You're still watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel.
Here are the other headlines we're keeping our eyes on, courtesy of the Philippine Star. The Finance Department said the government should continue its cash transfers instead of suspending petroleum taxes to tame inflation, which ballooned to a 6-month high of 4% in March. DOF Chief Economist Gil Beltran said the economy would face inflationary pressures on both food and non-food items from the second quarter onwards. For one, Dubai crude averaged $113 per barrel in March, rising by 21% from February. He warned that the government may commit a mistake in policy response if it opts to suspend petroleum taxes just to cut pump prices.
Still from the Philippine Star, the BCDA and the Clark Development Corporation are looking to entice investments from the travel and tourism sector in New Clark City and the Clark Freeport Zone. Now, last Saturday, the two agencies hosted an investment tour of New Clark City and Clark Freeport Zone for the World Travel and Tourism Council. The tour covered world-class sports facilities in the New Clark City, including the Fédération Internationale de Natation, approved aquatic center, the 525-room athletes village, as well as the athletics stadium. WTTC delegates were also given a tour of hotels, resorts, tourist sites, luxury and recreational facilities, and corporate offices. Meanwhile, the Trade Department is set to hold an investment summit this week to encourage Singaporean firms to do business in the country.
Political analysts expect Vice President Leni Robredo's presidential campaign to gain more momentum two weeks before the elections. De La Salle University's Institute of Governance professor Ador Torneo said the increasing turnout in Robredo's sorties prove the strong momentum of her campaign. This as Robredo attracted more than 400,000 people during her birthday rally in Pasay over the weekend. Torneo added that VP Leni's campaign has been boosted by endorsement from local leaders and her supporters' house-to-house activities. UP Political Science professor Maria Ella Atienza added the grassroots-backed run of Robredo is similar to that of former President Cory Aquino, who unexpectedly won in the 1986 snap elections. Although Ateneo Research Fellow Michael Yusinko pointed out that the challenge for a volunteer-led campaign is messaging discipline.
Now, 2 weeks before the May 9 elections, and candidates at the national level are going all out in their campaigning. Manila Mayor Isko Moreno flew to Roxas City this morning for a whole-day series of rallies in Iloilo and Antique. Meanwhile, the Lacson-Soto tandem will be in Tarlac for a number of courtesy calls with local executives and meetings with farmers, transport groups, and other underprivileged sectors. Vice President Leni Robredo will be in Nueva Ecija for a meet and greet with volunteers and a multi-sectoral assembly along Nueva Ecija Pangasinan Road. On the other hand, election survey frontrunner Bongbong Marcos has not announced any public engagements yet for today.
Lapit na.
I know, just 2 weeks. This is it, all right?
And that's a first look into the business day this Monday, April 25, 2022. Join us again tomorrow at exactly 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for your free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News Live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Mag-isip-isip na. Time to vote wisely, mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.